Hey there. Hey, welcome to History Chats. There we go. Yeah, welcome to History Chats. We're continuing our theme today that we've been doing this month, which is some places you should know. And we're going up to the village of Brokaw, or the former village of Brokaw. Looks like everything is working, so I'm gonna have turn it over here to Gary, and he'll take it away.
Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, as Ben just said, as he corrected himself, the former village of Brokaw, but we'll talk a little bit about that. But we're talking about Brokaw because of its long history here in Marathon County. It had a unique place. It still has a unique place as far as I'm concerned with regard to the history here in Marathon County, its place in the long over 100 years of our history, specifically since the beginning of Brokaw around 1900. So if you're not familiar with Brokaw and where we are, so a map of Wausau in the middle and the Wisconsin River Valley as it travels through the center of the city, as it travels through the middle of the county of Marathon. So here we are. And then up a little bit, up north of Wausau, I guess it's several miles. Some say 5 miles, I'm not sure. But so there it sits on the Wisconsin River north of Wausau. So here we are. It's along the rail line going north of Wausau. So here, this is a map of 1900 or thereabouts, with a post office and a rail station there in Brokaw. So today, or a little bit, it did grow. From that little crossroads, it now sits in the town of Texas. This is a plat map of the town of Texas, and there is Brokaw becoming quite a village unto itself through the years. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So, but today, as we alluded to begin with, the former village, it's now on the map, on a plat map, it's just pretty much labeled as Brokaw Park. The streets are, you can see the streets are still there. It's still there, but and maybe this is a good place to talk about the merger. The village, the town of Maine, quite a few years ago, decided to merge and become a village. Brokaw was always a village, I think, since 1903. Don't quote me on that, but Brokaw was also a village. It became difficult through the years, especially after Maine became a village, for a village like Brokaw to be sitting within another village of Maine. So there was some dissolution of the of the village of Brokaw, and it became all a part of the town, of the village of Maine. So now we do not see as such at any intersection pointing towards Brokaw as such. That is all now a part of the town of Maine, and that is where we are today in 2024. There's a park there. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But in 1900, things were starting to change in Marathon County, in Wausau. This is a headline from the Central Wisconsin, a local newspaper here in Wausau. Wausau's new paper mills, and with a picture of the new Wausau paper mill coming into the little place called Brokaw. But again, I use this as a sign that this paper mill in Brokaw was really a part of Marathon County. It became a larger presence in Marathon County. It became really a manufacturing place for Wausau. Many people living in Wausau would eventually work up into work in Brokaw. And it's, as a Wausau's new paper mill, eventually the other paper mills, Rothschilds and Mosinee, would join the Wausau paper mills, but in Brokaw. But at this point, 1900, this was the beginning of the paper mill here in Brokaw, and setting that history starting in 1900. So we'll start with that history. The Wausau paper mills began 1899, 1900, and an annual meeting of the board of directors held. So these were the main characters at that time: N.H. Brokaw, Alexander Stewart, W.L. Edmonds, and E.A. Edmonds. Mr. Brokaw, Norman Brokaw, and the Edmonds were from the Fox Valley. Alexander Stewart, of course, was a local lumber baron. At this point in time, he was in Washington, D.C., but again, he was a large presence in this city for many years, and he was vice president of the Wausau paper mills at that time. Mr. Brokaw, like I said, Mr. Brokaw and Mr. Edmund and the Edmonds were from the Fox Valley. Obviously, Mr. Brokaw gave his name to this place along the Wisconsin River that would eventually be home to Wausau paper mills. That's where the name of Brokaw came from. Mr. Brokaw passed away in that same year, 1900. He was president, like I said, president of the Wausau paper mills. Brokaw, he was quite a frequent visitor to the Wausau area, and he, with other investors in the Wausau area, like Mr. Stewart, Mr. Brokaw, as well as Mr. Edmonds, were key players in the developing of the Wausau paper mills. This is a picture of Mr. Edmonds, who was another partner with Mr. Brokaw in developing the site. The site was quite a unique site along the Wisconsin River, a great power site. They had investigated other sites along the Wisconsin River for their new paper mill, and they decided on this little part of the Wisconsin River, what we now know as Brokaw. So soon the mill was built. This is a bird's eye view of the Wausau paper mills sitting in Brokaw. Think a little bit later than 1900, but this is how eventually Brokaw would start. This is the beginning of Brokaw. with the paper mill here sitting along the Wisconsin River. And Brokaw did become what would be called a company town as soon as the paper mill started to be built and start to employ people. We had to realize, of course, that we had to build housing for the people, and the company took that on. They really built the whole community. We'll talk about that in a few minutes here, but they pretty much built the community from day one. This is a street view and one of the main streets in Brokaw in the early days. As a point of what the population would soon expand greatly, and considering that there was hardly anybody here in 1900. In 1910, it was already up to 400 people. And we see that trend of 400, maybe in the upper 300s, continued for a long time. So a strong presence. Now, the city, of course, the paper mill was the major manufacturer in the city, but again, a strong population base for a good part of many decades of the 1900s up through the rest of the century, pretty much. So, but Brokaw had its accoutrements. This school, for instance, we could talk a lot about the development of the community itself, but I just want to show off a little bit about some of the community parts of Brokaw. For instance, the school here, it's more than a one-room schoolhouse that you can see. It was quite an extensive schoolhouse. The community, the Wausau paper mills, the owners of the paper mills pretty much took it upon themselves throughout these early years to develop parts that would make a community. And the schoolhouse here was one of those. Most likely this may have been a 1 through 8 grades because they had a large population, 400 population. So most likely this was a fairly large schoolhouse here sitting in Brokaw. The owners again built a clubhouse for the socialization of the community. This was their clubhouse that the owners built as part of the community life here in Brokaw. And it was very important. Also, I think Mr. Brokaw built this Methodist church in Brokaw. It gives me an opportunity to speak to, of course, there were other churches in the surrounding areas, Lutheran, Catholic, and it speaks a little bit to the ethnic, as with Marathon County, of course, we had the Polish people, we had the German people coming in, a variety of other ethnic groups coming in. There were the Lutheran congregations, the Lutherans, the Lutheran population was pretty much met by the pastors coming up from Wausau. A variety of other pastors and priests would come up from Wausau to have services. For instance, in the clubhouse, in the other community rooms, worship was very important to the community of Brokaw, to the population, and they were served by this church as well as by other churches, some being in the city of Wausau, where they would be sending their pastors or priests up to minister to the people here in Brokaw. And of course, Brokaw took on eventually, as it continued to grow and it became more modern, it took on a variety of other functions that for instance, the fire department here in Brokaw. The community of Brokaw continued to grow, a bank, the post office, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of minutes, but it continued to grow and it continued to meet the needs of the people living here in Brokaw, for instance, with fire department. I already talked about the schools, the churches. It started to have its own services that spoke and delivered services to the community here in Brokaw. I know this is a fine print and you can hardly see it, but this is a page, I have a couple pages from the city directory. I think this is in the 1950s. But again, it just shows you the number of people, the people that were living here in Brokaw, and they were working at Wausau paper mills. This was the people living in those homes were working in the mill, and you can see that a lot of those names were pretty much identified as being working at the mill. This was the Wausau paper was their major employer. Also, they took the village officers, and it spoke a little bit to the demographics of what was happening here. City directories would often give these little sentiment of the demographics of what was happening, the village officers, so you could be seeing that they were running the village and governing the village at this time. The next page again would speak to the officers of Wausau paper mills, and also, for instance, the post office. Brokaw had its post office for many years, and it's listed there. It gives you, I think the city director gives you a little bit of a clue as to the people living there, as well as to some of the, as well as to where they were employed, which at this time was pretty much all Wausau paper mills. But Brokaw had its other claims to fame. It had its other, one other instance, for instance, of Brokaw being put on the map, so to speak, was the ski jumping tournaments that was always being held at Brokaw Hill. This was pretty much in the 1950s. These were big events. These were big events not only for Brokaw, for Wausau, for Marathon County, for central Wisconsin, for the state of Wisconsin. They were incredible. They had two great ski jumps. They drew people from throughout Wisconsin for sure. It was, for instance, 3,000 spectators to Brokaw Hill Sunday. In fact, the story about the ski jumpers was pretty much that they had to increase their parking lots because as the cars were coming up from Wausau, they were backed up past the Highway W because all these spectators trying to get into Brokaw and see and be a part of the ski jumping that was going on. Ski jumpers from around the world, mostly Scandinavia, of course, Northern Europe. But again, these ski jumpers were coming from all over the world to be a part of these ski jumping at Brokaw. It really was a big part of the history, I think, of the big part of the history of Brokaw. And I think that history should be told in depth somewhere. I think that there's just a lot of stories with regard to ski jumpers in Brokaw, of course, in Marathon County, Wausau, of course, the great history of ski jumping here in Wausau. But again, Brokaw was sort of that high mark of ski jumping here in Marathon County. I just want to again get back to get back to the Wausau paper. The Wausau paper story is an important part of that story. Here's a picture of, I think it was from the Herald in '85, but I think this is an earlier picture of the Wausau paper mill in Brokaw. Again, the workers, the young people coming to Brokaw, coming to Marathon County to work and finding work in manufacturing here in Brokaw. And again, like I said before, it's part of the story of paper mills in Marathon County. Eventually, after Brokaw, we would see Rothschilds and Mosinee. But again, that after 1900, we see the decline of white pine in Marathon County in the North Woods. We're starting to see the transition to manufacturing, and this was quite dramatic. Between 1900 and 1910, 1911, three big paper mills in Marathon County, and we start to see that the employment from sawmills along the river to paper mills and to other wood production factories would start to transition Marathon County from that pinery county to other kinds of lumber, paper mills, and other lumber production. And I think that Brokaw is part of that history of the transition to manufacturing, to other kinds of manufacturing here in Marathon County, and Brokaw in a way stands out for that. And again, another part and continual growth of Wausau papers. Wausau papers continued to grow throughout the rest of the century. Really, the history of Wausau papers towards the end of the century, it gets that's another story. I really don't want to go into that. That's a large story of corporate decisions with regard to that paper mill in Brokaw. But again, throughout the years, Wausau Papers continued to grow. It became a national company, and it was continued to operate that paper mill in Brokaw. Again, an important part of the Brokaw. This is view across the Wisconsin River, the dam and all. And again, we can see the Brokaw as a little village sitting there along the Wisconsin River. The paper mill, the river, and the homes and houses and the services of that was happening in Brokaw. Again, this is a little bit more of a modern picture, but again showing the growth of Wausau Papers and the growth of Brokaw and the community serving the population of that little community. But then again in 2011, like I said before, the corporate decisions to close the mill. 450 employees will lose their jobs when Wausau Papers Brokaw facility shuts down in March. That would have been in 2012. This was a December headline. But again, this was major, and not only major to Brokaw itself, but it was major to the rest of Marathon County. 400 employees affected Wausau. It affected, I'm sure, the rest of Marathon County itself. It was a shock to the community of Brokaw as well as to the community surrounding it, and it was really a major instance in the manufacturing history of Wausau and Marathon County. But again, we come back to this is from the centennial of Brokaw. You know, quite a proud community. While it was there sitting along the Wisconsin River, this was their centennial with the paper mill and the rest of the community. Quite an honorable community for many years, working at the paper mill and raising their children at the school, and that little community serving certainly the needs of the people living here in Brokaw. Today we have Brokaw Park. The streets of what was then Brokaw are still there, but we have Brokaw Park, part of the Marathon County Park system, sitting along the Wisconsin River north of Wausau. So with that, I just have a brief little history chat. I know it's very Brokaw. There's a lot more stories to Wausau papers and to Brokaw. I tried to cover it a little bit, some of the parts that I think are important, but the history of Brokaw and is an essential part of the history of Marathon County. And as it sort of fades maybe in people's memory, we here at the Historical Society want to make sure that the history of Brokaw is still always a part of the history of Marathon County and its great importance to that history. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ben.
Yeah, awesome. I think that kind of rounds out the program for today. Before get away, next week we'll be continuing our look throughout the county to some places you should know, and we'll be going to Granite Heights. So if you're not sure where Granite Heights is, or you want to know more about it, tune in next week, as always, at 12:30 on Thursday, or catch the recording after the fact. Also coming up, which you might be interested in, is next weekend. If you're watching this around the time that it goes live here, we have the first History Speaks of the year. This is our mostly monthly lecture series. We're bringing an expert. In this case, we're bringing in Lee from Colby, who's going to be sharing his really interesting story about the shootout at the Krieger farm. During World War I. Really interesting moment in American history, and specifically tied here in central Wisconsin. So if you want to come out to that, that'll be 2 o'clock next Saturday here at the Woodson History Center. It's a free program. Just show up and sit down and learn a little bit about this interesting area in history. But yeah, I think with that, we're gonna bring this to a close here. Thanks so much for watching, as always, and hope you have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time for some more History Chats.